welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. The Fire Break is sponsored every episode by Team Wildfire, developing innovative new technology and tactics to tackle the world's most destructive fires. I am joined today here with the incredibly well hairstyled Jeff Shelton. Jeff, welcome to the Fire Break. How are you?
It's great to be here with you, Steve.
Hey, thanks so much. So, Jeff, you are a fire behavior specialist. Does it mean if my fire is misbehaving, I can bring it to you and you'll work with them and improve their behavior?
I wish I could say that. My main function when I'm out either working with my incident management team that I do, we go out and are assigned to some of the largest wildfires on the federal side. I work on a federal incident management team. And my main job, the tip of the iceberg above the surface, is to determine two things. It's the speed of the fire and the intensity of the fire. When I'm working with the speed of the fire, that really will tell us and inform us on strategy. Do we have enough time to do what we want to do before the race between the fire and the crews that are in that suppression? Now, the intensity of the fire, which we are measuring by flame length, is typically how we measure it. That will inform our tactics. And so what type of tactics are we going to need to bring to this intensity of fire? If it's 1 foot flame lengths, we can do different things than if it's a 200-foot wall of flame that's coming our way. So those are my main two jobs when I'm out as a fire behavior analyst. And I use a lot of different tools to help inform that between the computer fire modeling, the geospatial side, and then just the fact that I've been throwing dirt at fires for 35 years. So you marry those two together, and that's what I do.
You end up with this hairstyle, right?
And you end up with this hairstyle. Yeah, right. I had a wonderful head of hair before I started.
This makes you more fire safe, doesn't it? You've removed some of the potential fuels in the area.
It's all about the fuels, right?
Right.
A heat source or a heat sink. You know about that.
Yeah. So let's see. In the Shawshank Redemption, the two things were time and pressure, right? If you wanted to dig your tunnel out, your things are speed and intensity. So let's just break those down for a second. When we talk about speed, are we talking about the speed of the movement of the fire front, or are we talking about the speed with which the fire consumes any given amount of fuel, or both?
It's a kind of a marriage of both, because the fuel, and when I look at the fuels and what people commonly look at are termed fuels or vegetation, I simply see that as stored energy. It's stored energy, pure and simple. And the rate that fuel or that stored energy will give off its energy and pass it down the line, it's almost always a function predominantly of fuel moisture, how much moisture is in that. And so will that fuel act as a heat sink and absorb energy before then it can pass it down the line, or is it already dry and desiccated, and then that fire moves unimpeded as fast as it can get across the landscape? So the ability for the fuel to release energy and then the alignment of the different forces will tell me how fast it can get from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill.
Okay.
So it's kind of a marriage of both of those.
So in layman's terms, this would be the idea, like, yes, you can get a wet log to burn. It still has the same potential energy, but you have to heat it enough to cook all the water out first before it's going to be readily flammable. So dry vegetation is that stuff that's just ready to go, and moisture vegetation still has the same potential energy. It's just you're going to have to add more energy to the recipe first to cook it off till it's good tinder.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And one of the tools that we use commonly is we add energy into the landscape to remove that stored potential through firing operations. And we have to give what the fire gives us. And there's good times to add that energy into the landscape, and there's bad times. Sometimes our hand is forced, and we have to do things that we have to choose the least savory of two different options. but they're both unsavory. But adding energy into the landscape and timing that correctly is a function of understanding that fuel piece.
And it seems that there's some cultural knowledge divergences in there, right? That when you first learn, like, hey, we could do prescribed burns and we could light the world on fire to reduce the fuel load, let's go do it. I'd understand your enthusiasm for that. But when I've heard Aboriginal fire experts speak on this, they say there's a time and a way for each type of fuel to reduce it to ash. And if you follow nature's schedule on that, then you can do this very safely. You'll maintain low flame heights. You don't have to wear Nomex. You just go out there in jeans and do it the way they do. What are we learning from other cultures that have been doing this a long time?
Absolutely.
So what are we learning from cultures that have been doing this?
Right. For generations, millennia, and they're working with the land, not against it. And that's where we have gotten ourselves into this current position, not only in this country, but in a lot of other places where we've tried to assert our will on that burn window, is what we call it in the fire world, is a burn window, the place where you can manage the fire intensity. You have to be able to manage fire intensity. When you add energy into the landscape, there's a saying, you never put more fire on the ground than you can hold. Now, it seems really easy when the wind is at your back and the fire is burning uphill. Everybody who fires in those conditions looks like, firing is easy. This is a no-brainer, because fire wants to run uphill and downwind. And if that's already against your fire line and is adding more depth without you even doing anything, that's low-hanging fruit. Where the true challenge comes in is if you're trying to manage that fire line and you're at the top of a hill and the wind is in your face and it's adverse to your line where you're trying to build depth. That's where people who do firing operations really earn their money, is by being able to do that.
Okay. I don't know if you know anything about the technology that we're working on at Team Wildfire, but we're starting with the premises that the wind is the dominant force in any fire escape, right? No wind, you get one type of fire. A little bit of wind, you get a different type of fire. Strong winds, that's which way the fire is going, whether it's uphill, downhill, or sideways. Like the wind owns the fire, and that if you could own the wind, you could have much more control over the fire. And so our premise was that even in the face of adverse winds that are driving fire towards you, you could still light a backfire in front of you and push that fire forward if you could generate more local winds pushing towards the fire than natural winds pushing the fire towards you.
And that was correct.
Thoughts?
That was one of the things that when I saw your product online, I was intrigued about that, because that is true. The wind is one of the dominant factors of being able to provide depth to your fire line so that it can negate the effect of the fire, the speed and intensity when it hits that. So that's the whole idea of surrounding or containing a fire, is building enough depth that you could let the fire run into it and basically pick up the baggage on the other side if there's any escapes, rather than having it roll right over you and continue on. And there are certain scenarios, like a wind-driven surface fire or even a crown fire that's gotten up into the canopy, where we are doing what has always been done for a long, long time, is we're just going to anchor in, we're going to flank the fire, and then eventually when the weather is on our terms, we'll pinch it off. So to be able to change that equation with the weather was kind of intriguing to me, and that's why I thought this would be a good conversation to talk about, especially from the standpoint of wind.
Yeah, and rain too, right? So if our concept is a hurricane on wheels, then that's a combination of wind and water. wind and retardant, and that if you used, jet forced exhaust to distribute, antipyrolytic chemicals, you could distribute them over a much broader area, much faster, more efficiently than you could if you're doing it by hose. That you could cover 500 or 600 feet of terrain, with a coating, rather than overly dousing vegetation where most of your applied liquids just end up on the ground and not on the vegetation. So these are things that have to be, figured out or derived experimentally. But that's the premise that we're working under.
Yeah, every single fuel type, and actually every single species of plant has what they call the moisture of extinction, and that is at a certain moisture content, that fuel will not ignite or pass its energy to the next parcel of fuel. And so by changing the moisture of extinction,
say that again, because that's important. Say that again.
Yeah, so
Every
the
fuel.
moisture of extinction is the point where fuel, when it has enough moisture in it, it will not either ignite or pass its energy down the line. And we use this concept all the time, where we are wetting fuels down, changing their moisture of extinction, so we're creating a sponge for the energy. Now, the heat of the fire will drive that off, but it will slow it down. And so as you can continually slow down the fire, that's where you can make some progress. A fire and fire management is a dance. There's a tempo to the fire when we first get there where the fire has the clear advantage. It's at a pace and a tempo that we are trying to match. Eventually the weather changes, the humidity comes up, but we keep our foot on the gas as suppression forces, and then we're able to catch up to the fire and then envelop it. During certain burn windows, during certain seasons, Santa Ana season in Southern California, hot, dry weather in other parts of the country, that race is often, it's more of a marathon than a sprint, because we're trying to catch up. And fire, when it's expanding exponentially, it's adding more and more acres, and we have to secure that line with personnel. And so any technology that we can leverage in the future is going to be quite useful. And there's a lot of very innovative ideas that are out there. Just this last week, I was at a conference for one of the GIS providers here in Southern California, and the innovative ideas from people who are looking at this from all sectors. It's really inspiring to see.
Yeah, I was talking to a firefighter this morning, and we were talking about the importance of the interdisciplinary approach. That it's right. It's going to take a lot of people looking at this problem from a lot of different points of views, turning the problem on its head, before we come up with solutions that work, reliably and universally.
Yeah.
What are some of the technologies that you're seeing?
Yeah. I'm sorry. One more time.
Oh, I asked, what are some of the technologies that you're seeing now that you think hold promise for megafire taming?
A lot of them have to do with planning and being very strategic with the suppression forces, where understanding where fire wants to go instead of an approach of anchor, flank, and pinch. We're able to use the technology to inform us where the fire wants to go and allocate our resources where the fire wants to escape. One of the other companies that I've recently talked to is talking about developing a system that will drop high expansion foam from a Type 1 helicopter platform. And high expansion foam has been used in the structure fire world for quite a long time. And this company is developing a system. They're looking at getting their funding right now, but they have a prototype to drop foam blanket that with high expansion foam, you're using a very little amount of water to create the foam. So what you can do with a single drop is create a long fire line potentially. So these are the type of innovations, that I think will lead to other innovations, like what you're doing with the jet engines. That has potential, but that may open up a different style of fire suppression. But people who are, fortune favors the brave. The the bravery intellectually is just as important as the bravery of the folks on the ground to be able to do these things.
Yeah.
And then obviously the UAS technology, the drone technology. We're commonly now using drones to add energy into the landscape. We're using them to
Dropping the
place
little
fire
dragon's
where
eggs.
yeah, exactly. Those used to be exclusively applied by helicopter. And so we talk about that burn window. When the best burn window may be and is commonly at night. The helicopter's not going to get out there and drop those dragon eggs at night. But the one of the platforms called Drone Amplified by a company called Ignis. They have a
Yes.
very simple user interface, and we're using that on a more and more common basis all the time. And it allows us to fight fire on our terms rather than the fire's terms. And these are the type of ideas that once were uncommon, they're going to be more and more common.
So have you spoken with Andrew at Ignis and
I've
discussed the
corresponded
product with him? And
online a little bit, but I've mostly been just a great admirer of their platform because we've used it on our incidents. And they're not like anything innovative. It's not without risk, but the risk to
right.
people is much greater. And so,
Sure.
as things become more and more commonplace, we won't even think about this in 10 years. In 10 years, we'll be probably using lasers from UAVs rather than dropping
Yeah.
these balls. I mean, honestly, why not? Those are the type of things.
Right. No, truly, why not? In fact, there's a gentleman I spoke with last week in Israel who is using lasers. These are 10 megawatt lasers, pretty hefty stuff. And he uses like a high precision camera to map a tree instantly and figure out where's the intersection between branch and leaf. And then the laser basically pulls an Edward Scissorhands, and it just cuts all the leaves off, in seconds. And when the leaves drop, then the ratio of mass to surface area is drastically changed, making it much more difficult to ignite that tree. So instead of having to cut down trees to save trees, you just denude the tree, the canopy fire stops, and then the tree is still there next year, which is kind of nice for the tree.
From a
So a lot of cool new technologies out there.
Yeah, and those are really good applications of the science, because we're just taking the problem, dissecting it, and like anything, you're as strong as the weakest link in your chain. You break that chain, and the fire stops. One of the things that
Yes.
I was looking at with your technology was I had seen where you were talking about using that to change the fuel structure. That wind, kind of a supercharged leaf blower, as it were, and
Yes.
that would have some promise as well. One of the other things that I have seen on incidents that I've been on wind-driven surface fires, that as the fire approached a draw or a drainage, the wind through the Venturi effect, Bernoulli effect, would accelerate through that area, and the fire, when it went through there, literally stopped, because the residence time on the fuel particles, it couldn't hold enough heat because it was being dissipated faster than the heat could burn that.
I see.
So all the vegetation was heat frozen in that direction that the wind was blowing, but none of it had consumed. But then when it got back out the other side, then it started back up again. And so that in fire behavior, we call that the wind limit. And so if you can raise the fuel moisture above the moisture of extension, and if you can defeat the wind limit of certain types of fuel, especially grass, which has a high surface area volume, like you mentioned, you can potentially make some changes. You know, I'm assuming that you know I was in aviation for a while, doing a rescue on a helicopter, and we had a saying: never fly the A model of anything, but the B model and the C model are, it takes, you got to kiss some frogs to find your prince. So this
Yeah,
is
that's
one of
right.
those things, these technologies. The first one may be a little clunky, but as you stay
Yep.
persistent and believe in the science of it, it will come out the other end. It may not look like the same thing as you started, but that's what it's
Probably
all about.
not.
Yeah,
Well, we'll turn it over to some graphic designers to make it look really cool, and then that'll
yeah,
obviously make it work better.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
True.
So we're building our big alpha right now. We've
Hmm.
built three smaller ones with little jet engines that are used to power target drones. But
Right.
right now we're building our 5,000-pound thrust test machine on
Wow.
a logging forwarder platform, so that we can carry a few thousand gallons of water, a couple hundred gallons of fuel, and then, like you said, you just go out and start playing with it, get feedback, iterate, iterate, iterate.
Right.
Eventually, you end up with something useful. But in some cases, even if it's not perfect, your first iteration is still many steps beyond what current capabilities are.
Yeah.
Right. The
Absolutely. It
right the
it teaches you how to fail, and you have to have
we don't fail. We just eliminate options. Right.
yeah. That's perfect. That's a perfect way to look at it. In the fire
Right.
behavior world,
Yeah.
or the incident management team world, when we get to an incident, um, my forecasts, and I tell people this on my very first briefing when I'm briefing, you know, hundreds of folks that are getting out ready to go out in the field and do their job, is that you should expect that my forecast to you is going to get better every day as I become more and more familiar with this landscape, because I may or may not have ever been there and the seasons have been different. But what I tell them is the quality of my forecast to you is in large part a function of the feedback that I get to you from you. Is that I need to know
Okay.
what you're seeing in the field to give me the feedback
Yep.
to adjust my models, to adjust my thinking, to understand what the environment really is, so that it will get better. And then as that feedback loop continues to mature, then you can expect that analysis to get better and better. And it's no different than what you're doing when you're doing your experimentation on a new product. That failure is your feedback loop, and then you should be getting better and better.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's just like a mouse in a maze. He's just learning which paths not to take. Eventually,
yeah,
there's nothing left but the path that gets you to the cheese, right?
yeah. That's it.
There's
That's it.
only so many options. So let me back step with you for one thing. I noticed that you're in the anthropomorphic fire camp, in that you talk about what the fire wants to do,
Correct.
and you describe it as if it's a living thing and it has a will. Which I'm not sure that there's scientific basis for it, but there might be
No,
really practical reasons for doing it, because it gives people a way to wrap their head around, around what's happening. Uh,
no,
do you
and
feel
that's
like so?
that.
Okay, so
Yeah, I would say people who are outside that world, they need something to have a word picture for, and if you can provide that for
yeah,
them, while also honoring the science and the um, the physics behind it. Um, because often when you're speaking to an audience that's going out to fight a fire, you'll have folks that have been there. This is their very first fire, and you'll have folks that have been there
right,
for 30 years. This is their last fire before they retire. And doing your messaging is as important as understanding the science, because I know a lot of really, really smart people that can't articulate and communicate for folks to identify not only the hazards, but part of the art of what we do in the fire behavior world is identifying the opportunities. For every hazard
I
that
see.
I identify in a briefing to somebody who's going to go out and put themselves in harm's way, I want to identify an
Yep.
opportunity, a place where the fire is going to run out of, we use the term alignment. The alignment's going to, it's going to fall out of alignment here. This is your opportunity. Because if all you have is one side of that coin where people are just looking at the bad things that can happen, they will become risk adverse. They won't want to engage, and that does no good for the suppression efforts either. Because the safest place
Right.
to be is at home and not even fight the fire, right? And we're not there yet.
That's right. Yep. No. This is the running
So that
in to not
communication
running away
piece, and then
crowd.
yeah, that communication piece you identified is really important, and anthropomorphizing that part of it is just a communication piece. Some folks, they don't have the science. Maybe
Yeah.
they have
So they're not
really
offended.
lived. What's that?
I said if they don't have the science, they're not offended.
No, exactly. But
Right.
that doesn't mean that they
Right.
don't have a lot of, as we used to say, slide trays. Now what, PowerPoint slides or Google slides in their slide tray, because you learn the theory, but then you really need to apply it by being out in the field. And so it's a mixed audience quite a bit. So you have to appeal to both of them. So yeah, I don't think
Yeah,
fire has its
we
own
really
consciousness.
do. Yeah, we really do talk about suppression in terms of a lethal endeavor, right? Drown it out, suffocate it, freeze it, etc. Just things
That's
we would
that's
do to a living thing.
that's much more elegant than saying, heat source or heat sink or moisture of extinction. If I used a lot of those terms when I was briefing folks, I'd lose them in the first five. Yeah, but I would also lose
Right.
their attention, right? And then I can't get my
Yeah.
message across. So
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
just about knowing your audience.
Let's talk about data for a second. You said that your forecasts would get more accurate as you had more time on the ground with any given fire,
Correct.
because you're getting to know the terrain and the vegetation and the moisture and the wind trends, etc., and the capabilities of the crew and the equipment that you have deployed. So you'll get
Correct.
more accurate with that. And we can use sensors now to increase the amount of data that we can get. We can put not only around the perimeter of a fire, but even within the fire, we can put sensors to get information about movement and intensity and moisture content, humidity, etc. At what point do you feel that as a human, your limit is reached in terms of your ability to process and use that data? And once that point is reached, then do you see a role for AI in the decision structure for incident command?
The AI piece, I probably spend more of my time researching the AI piece than any other part of the equation right now because it holds such promise.
Fascinating.
I believe that within 10 years easily, probably more like 5 years as we approach some sort of fire behavior singularity, is that what the tools that I'm using to predict the fire are going to look completely different between looking at fire
Yes.
danger, which is a function of risk, or fire behavior, which is a function of what the fire is actually going to do. AI has the promise of it doesn't care about the experimentation that's already happened that feed the models, that inform the models, which then we give the model the input. It just knows I've seen this before, and if one of the kind of things that I've thought about is we're organic intelligence, right? And we're talking about artificial intelligence, but really, what these AI models have the ability to do is provide artificial experience. If you were out on a
Yes.
fire, you were able to see 50 years of fire. You would have an organic experience that you would inform all your strategy and your tactics that have perceptive base. You don't even know why you're doing what you're doing, but it's based on having seen it.
Sometimes with adverse effects, right?
and sometimes with adverse effects, because we all bring our own bias to it. But with
Right.
artificial intelligence or artificial experience, you could feed it multiple lifetimes of fires, more fires than you could ever go on in your entire life in every type of condition.
That's right.
And so that's where big data comes in. And so that artificial experience is, once it's honed, once it's focused, once it's identified, it shows the promise to, put myself out of work to a certain extent. What you'll have is people looking at the outputs and identifying, yeah, this seems realistic. There will be a gatekeeper on that. Because to be honest, when I am out on
someone's got to sign off.
Yeah, who's going to sign off? When I give a forecast to my the operations section on my incident management team, I would say 80% of the time, almost entirely, what I'm telling them is something they already know. They already know that what I'm telling them is going to happen. My true value is informing them of that other 20%, the things that they may not be seeing, something that they may not know in the climatology or in what happened with the weather the last 2 years that altered the fuel. And that's my job, is to close that blind spot that they have. That's only 20%, and that's where my true value is. I'm not telling them anything that they don't know. They've been in fire forever. They've got a lot of organic experience and organic intelligence, and so I'm just helping reinforce that. So when I reinforce what they already believe is going to happen, it gives them more confidence to be able to put people in harm's way, or be a little bolder, or look not just today's burn period, maybe 3 or 4 days, when I'm telling them, hey, the weather in 3 days, you have a window to now to then, but in 3 days you better be to here, or this fire is going 3 ridges over. And so those are the type of things that my guidance tells them. But organic or artificial intelligence, with all that data, with the sensors in real time, that's another thing that I've been working with, is a company that's trying to develop a mesh, and there are other companies out there that have mesh networks that aren't reliant on being hooked to the internet or a phone or any.
You get some Bosch sensors and right. Like Dryad is working on that. And so,
right, and there's multiple companies that are doing that. And it's basically a
N5,
for lack of a better term, it's a minefield of sensors that if something happens, in California, the alert camera system that now is using AI to identify changes from one picture, that same spot, to another picture, and it looks at it and goes, oh, this is different, because now there's over 1,000 cameras in California that are always doing a fire watch, and they employed in the last
companies like Pano AI are going down that road.
Correct, exactly. So now you have, instead of I used to work at a Fire Outlook, volunteer at a Fire Outlook almost, over 30 years ago. And that's how we did it, right? We were up in the tower with binoculars, with our fire finder, but we were only looking in one direction. These cameras, 24/7. And so, it's a way that.
So I think there's certainly benefit, right, to more detection. And I've seen on the innovation side, a lot of investment go into cameras, sensors, and satellites. What I have yet to see is firefighters running from a fire yelling, "Get me some more sensors." And so, it's one thing to contribute to the data side, and then, and I think it may be a mistake to think that with enough data you can put out a fire if you don't have the right fire extinguisher, right? When someone's breaking into my house, I don't want more security cameras. Like, I want bigger guns. And so it's at some point we have to, face the reality, like, we don't have big enough guns right now. We need better, physical suppression tools to knock these things out when we get there. I was really inspired by Gary Kasparov and his little game with IBM when he played chess against Deep Blue.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the first time where we really saw organic experience, right? This guy had played tens of thousands of chess matches, and then he goes up against Deep Blue, which maybe have only played one or two chess matches, but was able to iterate 100,000 moves ahead. And
Right.
for everything that Gary did, the computer had a better answer. And
Right.
so, what I'm looking at developing right now is a program called Deep Red, in honor of Deep Blue, that doesn't just gather data and say, here's what's happening. It's raining here. It's snowing there. What do you want to do? It says it's raining here, and get some umbrellas when you go out there. Oh, okay, that's actionable information, right? The
Right.
fire's moving up this ridge. Put your airplanes there. Save your helicopters for here. Build your line here, and really to play a tactical game with the fire, what I would call playing chess with a fire in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of a wildland fire as 100 or 200,000 acre chessboard, right? The fire has its assets: wind, fuel, low moisture content, right? Elevation, slope. So it's going to do what it's going to do. And then you've got your tools, right? You've got 4 airplanes and 20 helicopters and 4,000 guys and 6 axes and 20 toothbrushes and a sack lunch, right? What's the optimal way to deploy that? And I think that based on the scale of fires now, the optimal suppression plan is beyond human scale. I think that no team of sweaty old guys in a trailer are going to be able to compete in the future with an AI's ability to gamify what a fire is going to do and to know in advance, what to do about it.
Yeah.
What are your
The
thoughts
tools
on
that
that?
exist, the tools that exist now, there are several really long-standing geospatial platforms that
Yeah.
you feed it all the inputs: fuel, moisture, weather. It understands topography. It ingests a DEM, a digital elevation model, and it will tell you with different styles of missions that you give it where the fire wants to go. And this is all based on experimentation. So
Right.
there is that game that's going on, and it's operationalized right now. The on the federal side, the wildfire decision support system, and then in California, Cal Fire uses extensively a platform, a suite called a Wildfire Analyst by the company called Silva.
Yeah, I know
And
Techno.
both of
Yeah.
those are highly automated, especially the Silva product, where as soon as a fire is reported through a dispatch, it automatically places that ignition on the landscape and spreads it. But it doesn't do it in real time. It ingested the weather last night and
Yes.
runs my last conversation with the owner. I believe it
Joaquin.
runs Joaquin Ramirez, over
Yeah.
300 million simulations. So all it has to do is go to that pixel that it ran last night, and go through the file, and go, oh, this is what your fire is going to look like in this first initial attack period. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so what you're talking about is with the Silva product is very much a snapshot of an infancy of what the future could hold.
That's right.
When it's sensor derived.
Yeah. It's kind of 3 stages, right? What's happening now? That's okay. That's data.
Right.
There's what's going to happen that puts us in the realm of prediction, and what should you do about it?
Right.
And that's where I feel like the AI has the most room to grow right now.
Right.
How do you take a finite number of resources and deploy them the best possible way to achieve your goals under a given set of circumstances? And so the AI doesn't know what your goals are. It doesn't know that it's more important to you to save the nuclear power plant from catching fire than it is the hospital, for instance, right? So you've got to tell it, you have to create an order for your values at risk, right? And then then it'll say, okay, based on what the fire is doing now, based on the resources that you have, and based on what you hope to accomplish, here's the optimal way to go about it. And that might change, moment by moment. And right now, the incident command structure, it has a 12 or 24-hour lag between significant new data and significant new direction, with the exception of maybe get the heck out of there.
Yeah, and that has been one of the largest changes I've seen in the last, say, 5 years, is that real-time intelligence informing real-time action. And that planning cycle, what you're talking about, has become shortened because the feedback loop has become tighter and tighter. That OODA loop, where you observe, you orient, you decide, and you act. And that came out of the fighter pilot world. They call it the OODA.
Okay.
Loop. And the faster you can orient to your environment or observe your environment, orient to it, decide, and then act. And it's just that loop. The faster that loop can close, the more real-time intelligence you can get out. And so it's kind of hard to plan a full day's activity when you're getting this feedback loop, 3 or 4 times a day. And what you're planning at the beginning of the day is going to be different than what you're seeing at, say, noon. And that's where the high amount of professionalism with the folks on the ground who have the authority to make decisions outside of the plan, because they understand the commander's intent.
Right.
That commander's intent gives them ability to organically close that OODA loop based on the fact that they're getting satellite data, they're getting real-time observations from overflying aircraft. And so the planning struggle is going to have to catch up to that speed. And that's going to be a real challenge, something that I'm sure we'll be talking about at every single incident management team meeting this spring.
Yeah, and that data has to be distilled and analyzed and turned into an action plan.
Right.
And when you reach a certain threshold of data, humans just have a limited capacity to process that additional degree of, you put 3 radios on somebody, pretty soon you find out that they're tuning out 2 of them because they can't handle. There's just too much data going in.
We call that analysis paralysis.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is.
Yep.
And the best folks, and there's no shortage of leadership information that's available to now. One of the fans, I'm a Jocko Willink fan, and one of the things he talks about a lot is detaching, and your ability to step back away from it to make good decisions. And so it's very interesting. We live in a time that we have a lot of really good information, both just plain data and training and multidisciplinary understanding, but we're going to have to figure out a way to integrate it all in a way that there's something that comes out the end, because like you said, we don't have the ability to distill it all on a single level, and maybe AI holds that promise. I do know of a company.
Fingers crossed, right?
Yeah, I know of a company right now that I talked to last week that the folks who ran a company called Intera. Kay Dargan and Brian Collins, they are working with a philanthropic organization right now. One of the projects that we're going to be working on is a kind of a command AI, where they're going to be looking at fire line decisions at a lot of different fires, and kind of creating a roadmap of, if this, then that, to feed into it, kind of what you were talking about. And that project is going to be starting up here, and they have the legitimate backing to create kind of an AI command structure that will, again, inform.
Right.
These are all decision support, and I tell folks on the line all the time, these aren't going to make your decisions for you at this point, but they're going to support your decisions.
That's right.
They're going to give you information that maybe you didn't have, but then you're going to add your experience to it.
Right, and then you've got to, you might come up with great information, but you still have to dole it out a little bit at a time for people to act on it, because if they get a constant stream of do this, do that, do the other thing, then they feel like, okay, well then what do they need me for?
Right. And that's where defining things. I'm a big fan of the Forest Service took a lot of stuff from the military. Is the task, purpose, end state. This is what we want you to do. This is why we want you to do it, and this is what we want it to look like. And if you can distill things in real basic, functions like that, even though there's a lot of data behind it, that's going to be the key, is distilling it into things that we can take action on, that are, we use, again, another mnemonic, SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely, right?
Right.
So those if you check all these boxes and it works, that's what I would want my AI to do for me.
Yeah.
To give me
It's
a
just,
task,
I
purpose,
think,
end state, make it smart, and then the last mnemonic I would want it to do that comes out of the military is draw D. It's you can defend, reinforce, advance, withdraw, or delay. And if you think about it on the fire line,
yeah.
that's it. I mean, those are the five
Yes.
things. And I tell people when I teach my classes, I'm like, that's a good thing for marriage too.
Yeah, you
You
bet.
can either defend, you can reinforce, you can advance, you can withdraw, or you can delay. Those are tactics you can bring into your real life as well.
Yeah, right. Delay and withdraw.
Yeah,
Those
I
are,
do a lot of that.
yeah, that's the best strategy.
Yeah. And it's actually, it's
On
not
the
attack.
smart
It's
smart
advanced.
model.
Yeah, and I should say it's advanced, not attack, because that
Right.
never works in marriage.
No. On the smart model, that R is the catchy one, right? Realistic.
Yeah,
And what's realistic to one person's unrealistic to another,
right.
right? When Kennedy says we're going to put a man on the moon, to him
Right.
that's realistic, and so it is to NASA, and to the other billion people on the planet. Oh, come on, what the heck are you talking about?
Right.
So we have to empower the people who have an enhanced sense of what's realistic, if we want those things to actually come into reality.
Yeah,
Right.
that's on a fire line. Those are the hot shots, right? They will do things that everybody else will look at and say, nah, time
Right.
out.
Yeah,
Right.
that was where I came up with that motto. If it's impossible, count me in.
Right, exactly.
Right, because
they have what they call a bias for action,
yes,
and you need that. You need
Yes.
that, but you also need somebody who's kind of the adult in the room when that bias is overwhelming. One of the decision traps and
Yeah.
we study that quite a bit in fire is decision traps. Is this the first thing that I saw that or heard that sounded really good? And have I sunk in a lot of cost into this, and that's why I want to act this way. So
Right.
that's where that detachment comes in, where you can make good decisions.
Yeah, where
successful.
bravery is not just about what you're willing to do; it's
Yeah.
about what you're willing to backtrack on.
Yeah.
Am I brave enough to reverse my decision now that I have more information?
Yeah, that's some of the most courageous fire line decisions I've ever seen came out of firing operations, where we had devoted the time and treasure and expertise to do some firing operation, and the incident commander who was in charge of it, not because they were risk averse, they looked at it and said, no, yeah, can we do this? Maybe. Should we do this? No. And so
Right.
it was the right
It's
thing to
that
do.
gut check, right?
Yeah,
And
that takes more courage than just go for it.
yeah, but I used to study crime quite a bit, and interviewed crime victims as part of a plan to help people become more crime resistant.
Yeah.
And so I interviewed hundreds of crime victims, and almost universally, every story starts with, "I had a funny feeling." Right. As I was coming in, I was walking out into the parking lot and I had a funny feeling. Or I was walking into my house and I had a funny feeling. And I believe that funny feeling is when the 90% of the data that comes through our eyes and just goes straight to our subconscious
Right.
starts to filter up into our conscious.
Right.
And we start to become aware in some minor way of something that our senses has perceived, but we're busy thinking about whether we were supposed to buy, skim milk or 2% on the way home, and so we're not paying attention.
Trusting your instincts.
Yep.
That's part of the mature checklist that we do on the fire line. And aviation is classic for doing that. They are very much process driven, and understanding that if you have that intuition, hold short,
There's a reason.
and then
Yeah,
account
stop and
for.
think, analyze,
Yeah,
assess, all
yeah,
that stuff.
yeah.
And then maybe it's just because you had a bad dream the night before,
Could be.
but maybe it's based on some data
Right.
that you're processing that you're just not aware of you're processing.
Right. And some of it could be understanding yourself that you're just uncomfortable, but that's okay being uncomfortable too. One of
Sure.
the things that we teach in the fire service is teaching people to be uncomfortable or comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Putting yourself into a situation that would blind people with a fight or flight action,
Yep.
and doing the opposite. When I first was working on our air operations program, and I went out the door on an 1/8 inch cable, hundreds of feet in the air at night. I remember looking at my watch, my Garmin watch that had my heart rate on it
Ooh.
when I first started, and and I'm not doing anything physical, and my heart rate was pegged.
Yeah.
When I got out of the Air Ops program and I was going through some of my last recurrency cycles, I remember looking at my watch, and my heart rate was no different than that morning,
Yep.
because I had just become stress inoculated, as a
Yes.
term, and I knew what the dangers were after being comfortable, being uncomfortable. So
It's Robert Duvall walking around in Apocalypse Now.
exactly,
Right?
exactly.
Craters are blowing up all
Yeah,
around. It's like, yeah, what are you gonna
yeah. Well, the other guy was pretty good too. He said, the tide's not right.
do? Right. If you no point ducking, because if you heard the shot, it missed you.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah. And it was really an 1/8 inch cable, because that only has
Yeah,
a
yeah.
200-pound working load limit on.
It's
I'd be nervous, but
Yeah. But you know what? The more you understand, the braking stripes and the inspections that we do on it,
yeah,
those things all give you the confidence to go out the door on that.
as long as it's not inspected by the guy who works at Boeing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Poor guys, right?
Poor guys. Poor guys.
Yeah. Well, luckily they caught that before fatality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, I think you and I have a whole lot more to talk about.
Oh yeah.
But I don't want to keep our audience here too long. So what I'd
Okay.
like to do is just invite you back, so we can pursue this further. And I think what you were saying really struck me about the good solutions that have come from the military, that have filtered over from aviation and avionics.
Right.
And I have zero doubt in my mind that if wildfire mitigation were taken away from firefighters and turned over to the military, you would see the most amazing technology being developed really quickly, because the money would be there for it. They'd have a heat-seeking missile that came from outer space and dropped 200,000 pounds of liquid nitrogen on a fire, and it was done, and nobody even left the silo. Right? It would.
I can tell you that challenge currently exists. There's things out that we are getting a taste of,
Okay.
that we would love to have a full bite of,
Yeah.
that make a big difference even at a taste. And so, if they're just showing us this taste, I can't even imagine what that ability is.
Yeah.
So,
The
yeah,
the
I'd
future
love
is
to
going to
come
be
back.
fascinating.
I'd love to come back to talk to you about good fire, about how to add more fire to the landscape
Okay.
for a generation that it would potentially take to get us out of the fire problem that we have now by reimagining the good fire. So
Super.
that's a whole nother conversation.
Hey, let's have that talk next week.
Sounds great.
That'd be fascinating. I got one more question. So,
Yeah.
at what point in your career did you become enamored with the direction that's manifested as your current career? When did you realize
Uh,
this is fascinating, this is something I'm passionate about, and this is something I'm going to commit my life to?
when I remember being out on a fire and watching the ferocity of what was going on around me. I've been on the winter side. I've been a professional ski patroller for almost 40 years, and to see nature at both extremes on its worst or best, whichever way you want to look at it, because really it's not a good or a bad thing.
Right.
It just fascinated me to the point that I needed to understand it. And as a gadget guy, also a gadget guy, I know you are. I just knew that there were things out there that could help me understand it. And then once you go down that rabbit hole and you take that pill, you're done.
You're hooked.
Because next thing you know, you're talking to somebody who's using jet engines to fight fire.
You never know, right?
You never know.
Yeah, life's exciting, and I know we can think about what firefighting is going to look like 100 years from now, and that our imaginations inform us pretty well. It's going to be a really different ball game. I regret that we probably won't be here to see it.
Yeah, but I'm excited for the next 5 or 10 years. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Monumental. Wow. Well, Jeff Shelton, thank you so much for joining me here on the Fire Break. And if folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
They can reach out to me at Jeff at Shelton Analytics. And my website is sheltonanalytics.net. It just gives you kind of a feel for what I do. One of the things I do on the side, doing some analysis, some consultation, and education that I'm passionate about.
Well, I love the spirit and the intelligence and the adventure that you bring to this space. And we both know that's what this space needs to survive into the next space. Yep. So thank you so much again, Jeff. You've been listening to The Fire Break. You might have even been watching. If you do, you get to see some really good-looking guys here. And I want to thank you so much for joining us. Once again, we're sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing innovative technologies and tools for fighting the fires of the future. Thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next time. Take care.